So I want to talk about, some of the research we do in the business school. I mean, you might think these guys do some boring work that is irrelevant to what I do in life and what it affects my life. So I'm going to showcase to you some of the work we do and how it may relate to you. Okay. So this is research we have done over 7 years, but we have condensed all of this into 2 books. We call them Kiasunomics and Kiasunomics 2. And essentially this research is made so that it's accessible without all the economic statistical jargon, but make it simpler. Okay. Kiasunomics 2 is already released a while ago. Kiasunomics 2 will be released soon, later this year. Okay. So let's think about a very simple problem. Okay. You guys must be experiencing this very regularly. When you want to take Grab and they have surge pricing, what do? Do you really say, okay, I'm willing to pay twice the price because it's raining, or do you say, I'm going to not pay this price? What do you do?
I'll search for alternatives.
Like what?
And comment down.
Okay, so that's good. That's exactly how we should be thinking. Look, there's surge pricing, but there is an alternative which does not do surge pricing, especially like cabs. Cabs are not allowed to do surge pricing in Singapore. So that's the right time for you to then say, let me just switch to a regular cab, comfort, and when surge pricing is gone away, let me go to Grab again. Because Grab, essentially, when there's no surge pricing, is cheaper than comfort. But during surge pricing, comfort is cheaper. And you can see this on a regular basis. I do that. So we collected a whole lot of data for Singapore, almost half an hour by half an hour time frame within a certain geography of 1 kilometer, and found out that what is the surge pricing at that time for Grab on that day, and what do people do? How many people switch over to take a regular taxi? And we find huge amounts of people actually switch over. Clearly there is also persistence. Some of them are not willing to switch over. I mean, why would they not switch over? Would you think of that, I'm just going to take Grab?
Well, I think one thing is Grab has also booking of normal taxis on the app. And if you do that, you can get some points if you do it through that platform. So
yeah. So there are people like, sometimes I may just say, I'm too lazy to switch between apps, and I like the Grab, I like the comfort of sitting in the Grab. The regular taxi, it may smell inside, I really don't want it. So you may have some different utility function that you may still go with Grab and not take a regular taxi. So your money function may not be that important to you, whereas more comfort, you care more about the comfort of sitting in the experience of in the taxi. So we do very rigorously, but then we try to give the message, what do people do and what is the learnings from there. So here is exactly the slides we go through, and we look at what actually do people do during surge pricing. Another piece of research, we try to look at what happens during haze. During haze in Singapore, how does it impact your behavior? We looked at various outcomes. Specifically, we were trying to understand during haze time, what happens to your water consumption and electricity consumption. Also, what happens to hotel bookings. So for hotel bookings, we actually scraped the entire data set of all the hotels in Singapore. What are the reviews the customers get, the feedback during haze? And also looked at very detailed house by house water and electricity consumption in Singapore. Essentially, we have the water consumption on a daily basis per household within not just the block, but we know the unit number. So we can track how much water they are using. We would expect water to go up because during haze, you're stuck in the house, you don't want to be outside, and you want to be feeling clean, you take more showers. What happened to hotels? What do you think will happen in a hotel setting? Are you more likely to be giving good reviews or bad reviews?
I think it's more likely that they'll give bad reviews because they associate the bad experience they have in Singapore with the hotel.
Yes. So what if you were, let's say, the hotel manager, what should you do in response?
I think they should give some perks, so maybe like surprise them with some maybe breakfast in bed or free goodies.
Yeah, so essentially this is kind of things what you see is how the hotel managers respond very quickly during haze to some of these things, and they say, let me try to provide you with more comfort or more goodies in some sense to improve your experience. So while we saw occupancy drop in Singapore during haze, but the experience of the customers overall was a positive, and they said, oh, I liked it because the managers immediately responded by taking care of me and providing me what I wanted. So these are things we have been looking at. Let me go into something else, talk about houses. I mean, there was this big story in Singapore a while ago that, look, HDBs are really depleting very fast because they're on a 99-year lease and 50 years is already gone. Would you then think of buying an HDB, or you say, no, I don't want to buy an HDB because a used HDB because the prices will drop very fast? What do you think?
I think it's still worth it to get, because even you see the price drop very fast, it's still a home and it's still affordable compared to buying a outside private property. Like private property is so much more expensive to HDB. If you're just gonna buy and stay for like more than half your life, it's still a worthwhile investment.
Yeah. So, but the question was that I was very worried that this notion that HDB prices are going to drop like a rock, and after age 60, nobody wants to buy these HDBs, and if you're an owner of that HDB, your asset is really depleting, so the value you have in it is nothing is left, and so you may want to sell it quickly. So we actually looked at it, and we tried to compare what will happen to HDB prices as they age compared to private properties and freehold and leasehold. And what we actually find is the HDBs age fairly well. I mean, even after age, say, 30, this is what HDBs are looking like. They are not really dropping, unlike what you see this blue line. So HDBs actually do hold up their prices, which was surprising to me first, but then I realized why. Because the government actually goes out and tries to refurbish them and has various programs to essentially make sure that they provide upgrades to these HDBs and keep up their prices. Whereas the private condos, they don't have any such kind of program going on in them. So the government essentially does take care of the HDB properties, making sure that the consumers or the homeowners are not losing the value of the house they are living in as quickly. Okay. Another thing we looked at, what do you think if you have some information? For instance, if you are a real estate agent in Singapore and you're looking to buy a house, do you think you'll pay the same price as anybody else, or do you think they have some information advantage in buying the house? What do you think?
I think they would have some insider information.
Yes. So clearly what we find is that real estate agents on average pay around 2% lower price when they buy houses for themselves versus when they are buying houses for one of their clients. 2% is not trivial. So if you think about a house that is around $1 million, correct? That's around $20,000. So essentially they pay $20,000 less when they buy houses for themselves versus when they're buying houses for their client. And we see this persistently, that real estate agents trying to cherry pick the houses that they want for themselves versus when they're buying it for their clients. And we show this very nicely with using very nice data set, how they cherry pick these looking for weaker sellers. So essentially the seller may have distress, may need money quickly. So that house they want to go and buy for themselves, whereas a regular house that is being sold, they try to sell it to one of their clients. So this was a study to show that, look, why are we paying these real estate agents so much money? We pay in Singapore around 6% to them for their fee for helping you buy a house. It's just too much. I remember there was a nice story that somebody bought a house here for around $40 million. Now imagine 6% on that. Okay? That's a lot of money. The real estate agent essentially earned their entire year, so 2 years of salary in one transaction. Okay? So my view is that, look, why should we have such laws? So in Singapore, essentially, they actually changed the law and they reduced their ability to cherry pick or actually make these exorbitant profits on these things. Another thing, which I bet you do regularly these days, how many of you use PayLah or PayNow? One of those, everybody. Okay, why? Why do you use it?
It's convenient. Like you don't have to bring around cash and everything. Yeah, just scan the QR code.
Yes. Do you feel that when you're in the line, when you are buying your food, is it faster? Yeah. So you can think about essentially using this technology makes our life better. Everybody benefits. If you think of the merchant really prefers PayLah versus cash. Dealing with cash for the merchant is very cumbersome. You're cooking and you're dealing with cash, it's just not very fun. Even you as a customer, I think, why is he touching money when he's also touching my food that I'm going to eat soon enough? Okay? The banks actually also don't like dealing with cash because they have to take this money, put them in the ATM machines, they have to clean this money, they have to destroy this money, issue new currency, all of that. The central bank doesn't like it. The merchants don't like dealing with cash because the merchants then have to go deposit it in the bank. Maybe there is some theft. There is an employee who takes away 2 or 3% of the money just in the pocket. In Singapore, maybe less of a problem, but around the world, clearly theft is a huge problem by employees in these shops. So if you think of all this, PayLah is very great, very good. You know, you don't have to deal with it. It's directly deposited into your bank account. But what we wanted to see is what is the benefit? Are there additional benefits of PayLah? Clearly, consumers benefit. We know that consumer spending goes up when they use PayLah. On average, consumers spend more by 2 or 3%. Even your credit card, you end up spending more on your credit card. But merchants benefit as well, because now what we show in this research is that small businesses, young small businesses, actually are more likely to do startup. So imagine you have a small business, you're like, I have to get a deal with cash. Now if I can just get payment in electronic form, I'm just willing to start my business faster. Why? If you deal with credit cards, those are very expensive. To get a credit card machine set up in your small business, it will cost you around $3,000 per year. Okay? Very expensive. To recoup that money, you have to increase your prices. You're not that competitive, so you may not be able to start your business. But with PayLah, it does cost, what, $10 to set it up, and you're off to go. So clearly, PayLah helps. For small businesses, they don't want to deal with credit or debit cards. Also, they don't want to deal with cash, because then they have to go get the money from the ATMs, deposit them, and all of that. So small businesses benefit. We see that in the data. We show very nicely in this research that introducing PayLah or Pay Now in Singapore actually benefits the consumer in their spending habits and benefits small businesses in their ability to start their corporation. So I think this is, again, very related to what we do in the business school. Here's a graph that shows what has happened to mobile wallet payments. Quite dramatic increase since they introduced PayLah, and this is what is happening to ATM use. ATM use, you can see, is pretty constant, so which means ATM withdrawal doesn't change at all, but you are using more and more of electronic transactions. Okay, we see this by large and small businesses. What you see is small business transactions are going up much more than large business transactions, which makes sense. Small businesses will benefit the most out of these. This is by transaction amount. You see very similar evidence. Okay, as I said, it's convenient, it provides efficiency, it's safe. So all of these factors essentially help you think about moving from using cash or credit into e-wallets. Here was another research we were looking at. What happens when you buy houses? In Singapore, there is this cash overvaluation idea. When you are trying to buy a house, essentially you can come up, they come up with a value for the house, but you can pay slightly more above that if you want to bid for that house. Now the question is, why would somebody want to bid over what the valuation of the house is? And we were trying to understand, are there, because within an HDB, there are specific quotas in Singapore. There's like 80% for Chinese, another 10 or 12% for Malay, and rest for Indians. We want to understand why would you bid over. And what you see is that if you are Chinese, you're trying to bid in for a house where the Chinese quota is maxed out, you're willing to pay cash over valuation just to get into that house. Okay? I mean, so you can see there's lots and lots of research we do. I'll skip some of this. Here's another interesting kind of research we were looking at, because intergenerational mobility is a big issue. What do I mean by that? If you compare yourself to your parents in terms of your wealth, in terms of your income, in terms of your education, do you think you're doing better than your parents?
Yes.
You're doing better than your parents. Why?
Because nowadays we have more opportunities to get a higher education. For example, my mother, she only has an O-level cert because she didn't have the income to go and study, family income. Yeah.
So this is a very fundamental question in any society. Every society would like the children to be doing better than their parents. That's a hallmark of a society that is a progressive society. That's a society that is growing. The economy is growing. But around the world we are seeing, look, the wage gap is increasing, the wealth gap is increasing. If you look in China, there are 2 billionaires being created every week in China. But the average person in China is not doing that well. So we wanted to understand what is happening to Singaporeans in terms of their wealth and their housing mobility. Are the children in Singapore actually doing better in their housing wealth than their parents? I mean, you would think, yes, the house that the parents own, the house the children own are more expensive, or the wealth they have in the house is more than their parents. So that's something we want to study. I mean, this is important because if the children are not doing as well, then we are living in a society that is not progressing. Okay? So we meticulously collected data to match parents to children within a household. And then we look when the children move out from that house, what kind of house they buy. Now, if we look in the super rich, in the top 1%, okay, they are living very much around the CBD area. The parents actually, the children move out and they buy a house right there. Okay. What we look in the bottom end, bottom 50% of the population in Singapore, what we see is they're moving up. The bottom 50% of the population we see is when the children, when they buy the house, move out from their parents' house, they actually buy a house that is more expensive. That's comforting. That shows there is progression. But what we see is within 60 to 80% of the population, they are moving down. So their parents have bought a house that is more wealthy, but the children, they are buying a slightly cheaper house. Why? Are the children not doing as well? In fact, no. What we find is the children are taking advantage of the Singapore idea of getting everybody being able to buy HDB. So because you can buy an HDB that's slightly cheaper, subsidized by the government, the children take advantage of it, move out of their parents' house, which is more expensive, and buy a cheaper HDB. So even though what we see evidence that there is not upward mobility from 60 to 80th percentile of the distribution of children in Singapore, but it's not because they are doing worse off in life, but because they can take advantage of the HDB program. Okay. So this is also interesting because we can claim that Singapore is not actually receding in terms of intergenerational mobility. Actually, every generation is doing better than the previous generation. Here is something that we wanted to look at is, what do you think firms do? I mean, I am always suspicious of companies. They will skip and avert regulation whenever they can. So what we looked at is what happens to the level of pollution companies emit when it's dark. When it's daylight, I actually can see how much pollution a manufacturing unit is emitting because I can see the smoke coming out. When it's dark, I can't see it. So we looked in China specifically, and we find that once sunlight goes down, when it's dark, the amount of sulfur dioxide pollution goes up by 16% every day. Okay? That's a huge amount of pollution they're putting out in the atmosphere, and that causes more severe health outcomes for people living in that area. So, I mean, this has implications for us to then think about how do we make sure we have enough regulation so that these parents, these people are not suffering because of industrial pollution. Let me talk about one more research. So here is clear evidence. This is the places where the sulfur dioxide emission goes up, and here where there are no factories, sulfur dioxide emission does not go up at all before and after sunset. And this is where it goes up by 16%. So you can see factories emit more sulfur dioxide emission clearly to take advantage of regulation because we can't see what they're doing. Okay. Let me talk about one more, golf and land prices. This was recently in the news, that the research we did, and here what we were trying to understand is, do developers play golf after the announcement of land sale bids by the government? So we found that developers play golf with each other more often after the government says we are willing to put out this parcel and we are selling this. Okay? What do you think, what does that mean? Why would developers be playing more golf?
I guess they want to go out and discuss about the options and then try to find out where other people stand on the issue.
Yes, possibly. I mean, they could be talking about the weather, but they could also be talking about, hey, what do you think? This is what I'm thinking of bidding and all that thing. I have no evidence what they talk about on the golf course. I'm just conjecturing that this could be happening. What we find is that when developers talk to each other, the probability of winning that bid goes down. So essentially, some of the times they just realize, okay, you're not bidding, I don't want to bid it, let's let it go. Okay, let somebody else win. But when they do win, the bid is lower. The price they bid at is lower. Okay, so the bid price is lower when they actually talk to each other or play golf with each other after the announcement. Okay. Now, by no means I'm saying, look, they're colluding or they are doing anything nefarious, but it's curious to us to understand with the data. Again, as in a business school, what we are trying to do is collect a whole lot of data and make correlations of this data and see does that make sense or not. Okay? So this is exactly what you see. This is developer directors when they're playing golf. What happens to their golf playing pattern after this is at time 0 when the announcement happens. So it goes up dramatically, whereas other developers, when they're playing golf, their pattern doesn't go up as much. If you see non-developers playing golf pattern, it's pretty flat, but it's the developers' golf playing pattern jumps up quite a lot. Here is the price, what they pay is lower by around 14% when they are playing golf with other developers relative to non-developers. Okay? We were looking at some of the research, looking at how can we get Singaporeans to save electricity, and we just put out some flyers in the community centers saying that, look, if you save electricity, we will actually give you some money, or the government will give you some money towards this annual savings of $300. Or you can buy these fridges and air conditioners that are 3-tick air conditioners or energy efficient air conditioners. Do people actually pay attention to these, and do they save on electricity? And we found that actually people pay attention to these kind of flyers and information that is put out around the HDBs, and they save their electricity bill by around 0.6 to 0.8%. That's quite significant. Monthly bill is being saved by around 0.6 to 0.8%. We do all kinds of such research at the business school. I'm not going to bore you to death on this. You can read about it. You don't even have to buy the book. Essentially, you can go to my website. I have all these papers there. You can just download them. You can figure out what's going on and see this is the kind of work we try to showcase. Even for the students who come here, we try to teach them about how to do this kind of research. Any questions?
You mentioned previously for the housing one that if you are a housing agent, you spend approximately 2% less if you buy a house, right?
Yeah.
But isn't that just their commission, that because they buy a house and they don't have to pay your agent for commission?
No. What we find is the price that they're buying at, not the commission. The price that they're paying for that house, but we also show why. It's not just they pay 2% less, it's what kind of houses they buy. Or what we find is that they're looking for buyers who have some distress. Like there could be at times, I just need to sell my house. I'm old, I need to cash out, I need to give money to my children, or I'm sick, I need money for my health, to take care of my health. So I need to sell, so I'm distressed. I'm not going to negotiate as much. I'm not going to say, okay, if you don't buy it at this price, I'm walking away, I'll wait for the next buyer. So the agents have this information, so they look for those kind of buyers and then they buy from them. We look at a lot of studies. We look at how golf can improve women's outcomes in terms of climbing the corporate ladder. We find that women who actually play golf are more likely to be directors of companies in Singapore. Because clearly we know there's discrimination, gender discrimination around the world, and only around, 8% of women are in board of directors in Singapore, whereas half the women are actually employees. So why aren't women climbing the corporate ladder? Maybe they just don't have enough social interaction with their bosses. So we show that when they do have social interaction, they are more likely to climb the corporate ladder. So this is for women. They should say, let's start playing golf or doing more of these interactions with their male colleagues to...
Prof, with regards to this case that you just mentioned,
Yes.
how do you ascertain that the implication is that direction instead of, let's say, the woman is already in a certain place in a corporate ladder, and that makes her play golf more with
So that's a very good point. That's exactly quite a question I want you to ask me. Look, you're making this causal argument. Is that really causal going in this direction, whereas it could be going in the other direction? I just don't believe your causality. Maybe you're just establishing some simple correlation. So in this case, I would be happy to even say this is just correlation. That look, golf and board membership go together. But in the paper, we try to be more careful, trying to look at time-wise, that they started playing golf before, and then they climbed the corporate ladder after that. They became directors in companies. So though we do some kind of analysis towards that. But this is a very good question. I'm just kind of giving you like very simple form of the research, but if you read the research papers, we go into detail to exploit the data, to understand the data, to think about causality, to think about identification, to make the arguments cleanly, as opposed to otherwise we'll get these comments, I just don't believe your story. Other questions or thoughts? Yes?
Actually, one thing to add, I believe nowadays youngsters are probably buying cheaper houses, right? Because most of us are getting better at our financial literacy, so we see other forms of investment rather than buying like a good property. So maybe like we'll try to save on the property while take our money and invest somewhere else where the returns are better. So maybe that's one way we can look at the entire situation of people buying cheaper houses also.
It's possible. So I think that's very true that the younger people are more savvy, because there was a mindset across generations that owning a home is very important. Okay? That's your asset. Because owning a home provides you two things, an investment and a consumption, because you're going to consume the house as you live in there and you drive utility from that. But you're also investing in it. But the investment part, you may say, why do I want to invest in housing? I can invest in the market. I can invest in REITs, which is also a form of investing in housing. So investment, I can take apart. Consumption, if I just want to think about consumption, why should I be locked into consuming one house for next 30 years? I can rent a house for 3 years here, I can rent a house for another 3 years here, and I can derive more utility if I move around when consuming in different houses. then just an investment, I can separate, decouple these things. So I think younger people think more like that. I mean, you're more likely to living in a shared economy. That's what we do more and more these days. So you might say, I don't need to be investing and be locked down in buying this expensive house for next 30 years. So very plausible, something we have not done yet, but something we should explore and exploit. Good question you've given me. I'll think about it. Maybe Kiasunomics 3 will do something about that.